funny how much Canadians hate their winter. You think you'd be used to it by now. But they were really, like, they hate it. Because I like winter, but I haven't experienced the Canadian winter.
I think if you're near Lake Ontario, you know, the water, that big body of water modifies it. You get a lot of slushy, freezing rain and nasty, like it's not neither one nor the other, you know, that's unpleasant.
Okay. If I go there again, I'm going in autumn and winter. But they think I'm a bit strange. Okay. Welcome everyone. We're going to sit meditation first. Is anybody completely new to meditation? A little bit, okay. Okay, so settle yourself into comfortable posture. For those who are experienced with meditation, do continue with your preferred meditation method. For those who are new, I'd recommend all good meditation needs to begin with body awareness. Usually we use the breath. So put your attention onto your breath and try to hold it there. You may note each in-breath begins, lasts for a while, and then ceases. You may notice the gap between the breaths. The breath is a neutral object of attention. It's not pleasant, it's not unpleasant. It's not exciting, it's not dull. Putting your attention onto a neutral object can have the effect of calming the mind down. But it takes training, it takes an effort. Because the attention will want to wander away, your mind will want to dwell with things that it likes, it enjoys, things to think about, imagine, to want. So our training is to continually bring the attention back to the breath. For those who are experienced with meditation, try to see the difference when your mind is awakened into presence and when the mind is lost. Usually lost in thinking or lost in dullness. There's a distinct feeling when attention returns to yourself. You've been thinking about this or that, or your mind became dull, or your attention got caught in feelings in the body. Or sounds, or smells, tastes. Note that spark of awareness, of light, that fires up when you remember yourself. Sati, sampajanya, can be translated as recollection. When are you recollected? When are you lost, caught in some sensory impression? Just knowing that recollection is all the meditation method you'll need. You may note being recollected is uncomfortable to begin with. As it intensifies, as it purifies, as the mind stops going out to any object of attention, the feeling starts to become more blissful, brighter, more energized. As you enter into the purification states. So we're going to sit together for 25 minutes or so. Keep on bringing your attention back, reawaken mindfulness, be recollected. And be patient, reawakening attention and mindfulness 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Patience is the forerunner of all good states. For the last few minutes, turn your attention to the idea of metta, loving kindness, calling into your mind the thought, the feeling, the mood of loving kindness, universal to all world beings, using any method that you prefer. May use imagination, may use the words, may all beings be happy, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free from suffering. You may imagine radiating bright light from the center of your being. You may imagine yourself receiving loving kindness from myself and everyone here. As you open up to receiving, makes it easier to find that state in yourself. And if you can't find loving kindness, just pretend, or just have the intention. This practice is finding a way to call up, arouse, stimulate loving kindness as a beautiful mind state, sobana citta, beautiful mind state. Sabbhe buddha balapattha pachekanancha yang balang arahanta nancha teje narakang bandami sabbhaso sabbabuddha nubhavena sattha soti bhavantu te. Sabbhe buddha balapattha pachekanancha yang balang arahanta nancha teje narakang bandami sabbhaso Sabbadhamma nubhavena sattha soti bhavantu te. Sabbe buddha balapattha pachekanancha yang balang arahanta nancha te jena rakang bandami sabbhaso sabbasangha nubhavena sattha soti bhavantu te. So relax your posture. Okay, good. We have 1 hour, some Dharma contemplation and a few questions. We will finish by 8 o'clock on the dot. So, this practice that we are doing of meditation is the premise of Buddhism and other Enlightenment traditions means that we have a certain goal that we call liberation or enlightenment or awakening or liberation. Various different words that the Buddha used. Awakening, sambodhi, enlightenment, nibbana, liberation, vimutti, all of these different words, many different words used. And so we have the premise that there is something that we do not know yet. And it will take a practice in order for us to know directly and experience directly this new thing. This is different to a revealed religion where the truth is written in a book, usually told in secret to somebody who writes it down and then tells everybody this book is the truth and you have to pay enrollment fees to me and I'll set up a big church and we'll all be happy. So Enlightenment traditions, which exist in Christianity, which exist in Islam, every culture around the world has had people who have retreated from normal daily life. They've gone to the caves or mountains or forests and have engaged in this spiritual practice. It's quite important because modern day Buddhism, I feel, has become usurped by a pseudo-psychology where our goal becomes not this spiritual, complete goal, but becomes distracted by lesser goals, lesser aims. So forget about enlightenment, I don't know what that is. Maybe if I can be a little bit calmer or a little bit nicer or a little bit more mindful or a little bit better functioning. Had some activities with a business group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And these are high-powered business people. You have to have a big business to be in this exclusive club. And so they meet up very often and they invite experts on different things, archaeology or yoga or windsurfing, and I'm on their list as their meditation guy. And they said, we don't want any nonsense. We want to know what it is, we want to know the proper thing, the right thing, the best and the quickest way of how to do the most effective meditation in the shortest possible time so we can get back to work. I was actually quite impressed though. They were quite sincere and quite diligent. The guy who was organizing it said to me, because he'd done some Vipassana practices, he said, I want to do mindful eating. I'm like, are you sure? These people have all come together as a social gathering, swap business and trade. Do you really want to stop them talking? And I have experience in Thailand. You never stop Thai people from talking. So I didn't have much optimism. But in fact they did it. We had the whole lunch totally silent. It's quite impressive. So Dharma, I feel, has become distracted sometimes by lesser practices or lesser goals, and that we become more interested in trying to fix up our psychology to be a little bit nicer, better, more effective, calmer, to train the mind to be able to sit and breathe a little bit more. These are all nice things. I'm all for self-improvement. But one of the things that can happen with this shift in focus is what in religious and philosophical terms is called quietism. You can look that up, quietism, which means that simply making the mind quiet, withdrawing it from the usual excitements and desires and things of normal daily life, to make it a little more quiet, isn't actually a very good goal. All you've done is simply dampen down the natural effervescence or ebullience of the mind. And is that really holy? So the path, the proper path, the way that the Buddha taught it, was that we have a delusion. The world is delusionary or illusionary. And we have to withdraw our attention from that world and move into this new enlightenment, purification. That's another one of the words the Buddha used, Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. He said, all things are impermanent. If you see this with wisdom, you get tired of suffering. This is the path of purification. All things are suffering. If you see this with wisdom, you tire of suffering. This is the path of purification. All Dharma are non-self. If you see this with wisdom, you tire of suffering. This is the path of purification. So these are the exact words that the Buddha used. So this path of purification is one of exiting from Maya. Maya means delusion. It's more of an Indian concept than a Theravada Buddhist concept, but also in Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhism, you find this concept a lot. And I always wondered what Maya is. Is this delusionary? Does it look like you're sitting in a room, but really you're in a pod in a matrix somewhere, plugged into a computer, virtual reality? It kind of feels like it sometimes. So in what way is this world illusionary? Some people here, I bet Joe have read the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. You've read that? 2 people? Anyone else? 3? 4, 5? Okay. So in it, what's his name? Robert Pirsig, the author, when he was studying Asian Enlightenment traditions, he was in a class and they said to him, the world is illusion. And he thought to himself, were the nuclear bombs illusion or were they real? And he figured that they were real, so he quit the class. This was just one of the parts of the book that jumped out on me. By the way, he wrote a follow-up book from that called Leela. Anyone read that? Only Ralph? It was really good. It really brings down to earth the things that, because he'd gone off into insanity in the first book, and he really brings it back in the second book. So is the world illusion? The wars and things that are happening, the climate, well, climate change is illusion, but we won't go into that topic. Is it really illusion, or is this real? So the way that it works is we carry around, because the world is too complicated for us to understand, we carry around with us a set of stories. And these stories you can call concepts, we can call constructs, we can call expectations. We carry this big bag of stories around with us, and these stories predict what will happen in the world around us. So what happens then when something happens in the world that doesn't fit our stories? Suddenly that story will fire into life and will cause you some agitation or some suffering, will pull your attention into it. What we like to do is live within a nice, comfortable set of stories that we don't get pulled out or stimulated by the world around us. We like to be in a comfortable place. We like to surround ourselves with people who think like we do, who dress like we do, who eat like we do. We like to watch things use the computer, it just sucks you in, it's nice and predictable and comfortable. You'll notice when you're broken from this delusionary world, you feel uncomfortable, you feel some suffering. I saw an example on YouTube, because I spend far too much time on YouTube. And it was a man in America, and he had a MAGA hat, Make America Great Again, hat on. And he went into an ammunition store somewhere in America, and the guy who was running the store was a Democrat. And there was a few other people in the stall, but the guy in the shop refused to serve the MAGA guy. He said, "You're racist." So how can you carrying around a story that people who support Donald Trump are racist and nasty and evil and they shouldn't be served? There happened to be a black guy in the shop as well, and he was like, he's just trying to buy his stuff. He didn't say anything or do anything. And so if you carry around the story like that, then when you come up against something that doesn't fit your story, you feel agitated, you feel out of place, you want to fix the stories, you want to fix your interpretation of the world around you. My story that got agitated when I saw this video, because I don't care about Republicans and Democrats, the story that I got agitated, my expectation that was broken, was that they have a shop that sells ammunition that you can go into and buy like candy. Like boxes of these shells like that, to me, being English, I guess, or being sane. I don't... Sometimes I offend Americans. They're like, "Oh, I like my guns, we don't use them to shoot people, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, no, like, to go into a shop where you can buy big bullets that you're going to hunt bears with or shoot bottles or something is that sets my story off. What agitates my story. If you buy a big box of shells, you get a free hand grenade. I mean, how do they sell these things? So everybody carries this set of stories around with you that predict the world around you. And when it breaks down, you feel uncomfortable. This is what jokes are, right? Usually a joke is you set up an expectation that one story is going to happen, and then you switch it to make a different story happen. So I made up a joke. I thought it was quite good. I semi-heard it, but I cleaned it up and I tidied it up and I honed it down and made it into a good joke. And because I very rarely see anybody or speak to anybody, I had nobody to tell my joke to. The sad life of a Buddhist monk. So I told ChatGTP. I said to it, "Why don't penguins get married?" And it replied, "Penguins form monogamous couples for each breeding season and share the duties of looking after an egg, but they may change partners every season." And I said, this is all true, I said, "No, it's because they get cold feet." Thank you for laughing at my joke. I'm quite proud of the joke. But what was amusing, ChatGTP said back to me, true. He said, "Ha ha, I see what you did there. Penguin humour at its finest." I've only just discovered ChatGPT. I know everyone else was using it. I only just discovered it. So anyway, that's how you set up an expectation and then you change the story, and that's what jokes are. That's why we laugh at somebody when they're falling over or trying to jump from one thing to another. I like those ones of the animals. There's a great one of a skunk that's drinking water at a pond at night, and the video camera's out and you see quite clearly, and an opossum, which is like a possum but not related. An opossum walks by, sees the skunk drinking in the pond, and then just pushes it in the pond, and then carries on walking. So this is your expectations. You don't expect an opossum to just be evil to a skunk. So this world of delusion is this set of expectations that we have of how the world should proceed, how we expect it and want it to proceed. And when it doesn't proceed that way, it sparks or grabs our attention. Human beings like to be withdrawn into this world. We like to switch off, retreat into our mind, get caught up in thinking, in dreaming, in wanting, caught up in computer, YouTube, computer games. For me, at the moment, it's Adobe Premiere. That will suck me in. Video editing will suck me in. I've just done a new video. Will be released tomorrow to the 5 people that subscribe. That will suck me in, and I will be gone for days and days in Adobe Premiere. We like to be in that comfortable place where it's safe and things follow our expectations. This is like the zebra, or the zebra. If you know, do you know why the zebra has the stripes down it? Do you know how that works? People think it's for camouflage, but really black and white stripes are not good camouflage in a jungle or on the grass. A lion is better camouflaged than a zebra, or a leopard or something. So the point of the stripes on the zebra is it doesn't camouflage against the prairie and the savanna. It camouflages them against the rest of the herd. So when a lion comes, it can't see individual zebras. Zebras is the correct pronunciation. Sorry. It can't see individual zebras. What it sees is a herd. And so it finds it very hard to attack. Now, scientists wanted to track the zebras and their life and see how they work. So they would paint these red dots, big red kind of paint on the back of a zebra. And what would happen? The lions would get it, because now they can identify this particular zebra. So that's what we like to do. We like to actually blend in with the herd. We like to retreat into our comfortable Maya or delusionary world. Meditation is not about fixing this psychological illusionary world. That's what psychology does. It wants to fix your universe, fix your opinions, fix your views, the way you think about yourself and the world, so you will be a happier individual. What we're doing in meditation is withdraw from that completely. The first step is you put attention onto raw experiencing. So you can go to seeing or hearing or feeling in the body or the feeling of the breath, and you move to that to just experience that raw sensation, stepping out of this world, this thought world that we live in. This is the first step in waking up. The next step, we look at the way that the mind works. is leaping from one thing to another thing to another thing. You say, look at the breath, but you're watching the breath and the mind goes to a sound of something that's happening around you. Notice when sounds follow your expectations, they don't get your attention. When they break your expectations, they will get your attention. If you're reading a book and there are people talking around you, you don't notice the people talking. But if one of those persons says your name, will grab your attention. It's called the cocktail party effect. So you notice that the mind will jump, move from one object to another object to another object. This is technical language that we use in Buddhism. The mind is always focused onto an object. You never know yourself, you only know things that you can hold as objects. This can be an object of sight, an object of sound, feeling, taste, smell, touch, i.e. the body, or of the mind. So you can be sitting there thinking, sitting there meditating, and a thought comes up to you. I wonder if my sister stole my iPhone in 2006. Something comes up from your past, and boom, you get lost, you get caught in that story. Is that what happens when you do meditation? Thinking comes up, an idea. You say to yourself, I'm going to watch the breath. And you watch in, out, and then your mind sneaks in through the back door and says, but what about that thing that your mother said to you 42 years ago? And then boom, you're in the story. What about this thing that's going to happen next month? This election or new visa application? Boom, your mind is caught in that. So the mind will always go back to this conceptual world. So we are trying to teach the mind to extract itself from this delusionary world that we create with our stories. Then what you are seeing is not the stories and the concepts. What you're seeing is the mind will actually just see one thing at a time. You're looking at me now. You might look at the Buddha statue. You might hear somebody come in or go out from the back door. You may think to yourself, what are you going to eat for dinner when you leave here? The mind will jump and move from one thing to another thing. If you are mindful, you will see this process. Now, what happens then? If you can maintain your awareness, if you can maintain your recollection, bit by bit, the mind starts to know itself independently of what it thinks about itself. You're extracting yourself from the idea of I, the idea of me, and coming into actually what it really feels like. The more you hold attention there without thinking, this is very important because many teachers are telling meditation students, allow thinking to be there, just don't attach to it. This is not the correct teaching. You have to extract yourself from that world to progress in meditation. So then consciousness will purify, will start to gather together. The Buddha used this word. It gathers together, it concentrates, it unifies, it becomes bright, becomes powerful, becomes energized. You feel it through the body. An awakening occurs that is just very raw and very present because the mind isn't going out to any object. If you study any of the Thai teachers, you will see they talk about this all of the time. The mind going out, it goes out to an object. Even thinking, even something in your own head, this is still considered the mind going out. Lumpur Dun, one of the famous monks, he was asked to summarize Buddhism, which is amusing because he would only ever talk in very short. His Dharma talks were like 60 seconds long. And he was asked, what is Buddhism? He said, the mind going out. when the mind goes out, it suffers. The mind going out is the arising of suffering. When the mind does not go out to anything, that is the end of suffering. And bringing the mind back to not allow it to go out to anything is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. This was his way of talking about the Four Noble Truths. So there is that feeling. The mind doesn't go out to anything. When your mind isn't activating through any of your senses, it actually becomes brighter, more powerful. You get to enter into that mystic path that saints and sages throughout the ages have withdrawn to forests and caves in order to investigate. Just a few touches on this purified consciousness is enough to stimulate a practice for the rest of your life. And I've noticed this, that people come back to Dharma over and over again. You get distracted. I always wonder how much I can tell you, but there was one monk, this live streaming, he won't be listening. There's this one monk, and he was a monk for 16 years. I met him in Bangkok. I said, "How long have you been ordained?" He said, "A couple of months." And I looked at him, he was just comfortable in the robes, and he knew his stuff. I was like, "Really?" He says, "Well, I was a monk for 16 years before." I said, "Oh, really? Okay." And he'd been traveling back from somewhere in Europe. And he came back overland, and he was going through Kazakhstan. And he met a girl, fell in love, got married, and then was back in Thailand within the year, reordaining as a monk. Monks tell each other these stories to try and remind ourselves. So, where was I? So this is our practice, is one to purify the consciousness, to learn to see and know this, what it feels like to be that vibrant, purified life force itself. And this was how the Buddha actually taught. So the fire sermon, which I promised to talk about, was the Buddha's second sermon, second teaching that he gave. First teaching was of Four Noble Truths, and the third teaching that he gave was given to a bunch of religious ascetics. There were many of these groups in India, and they worshipped fire. And when he met them, he thought to himself, how can I convey Dharma to them? So he said this: you have the eye, you have objects of the eye. When the eye and the objects of the eye have eye consciousness, this will get your attention, and you activate passa. Passa means contacting. You activate that thing. So right now you look at the Buddha image to my right, and you have the eye, you have an object, you have eye consciousness. You've activated that thing, now is the object of your attention. You can move the eye to something else. What else do we have around here? To the air conditioner. Did you notice the air conditioner? It's been there the whole time. But now you put eye consciousness on it, this has become the object of your attention. So the eye makes objects out of the world around it, of which you focus onto, and then move from object to object to object. In psychology, this is called Gestalt. In philosophy, this is called phenomenology. Then a sound occurs and grabs your attention. You hear somebody coming in at the back. Who's that? Am I expecting somebody? Why did they come late? Could they not find their way up here? Your attention has now gone out to the sound. no sounds occurring. Maybe you close the eyes a bit and a thought occurs to you. Where will I go on my holiday this year? Shall I go to the beach? Thought about your partners, thought about your business, thought about your renewing your visa. And then your mind is gone out to that topic. So the mind will activate around different things. So the Buddha said to these ascetics, because of the eye and objects of the eye, with eye consciousness, you get passa, contacting with that object. Because of contacting, you get drawn into liking and disliking that thing. This liking and disliking is a pulling and a pushing in the mind to get it or to get rid of it, to move towards it or away from it. The ear has sounds. You get drawn into sounds. So the tongue gets drawn to tastes, the nose gets drawn to smells, the body gets drawn to bodily feelings, and the mind gets drawn to ideas and thoughts. So he said the eye is burning. It's burning with the fire of lust, hate, and delusion. Raka in the Pali, raka, dosa, and moha. Because when you put your attention onto something, it stimulates this liking and disliking, and now you are drawn into it and you are pushed and pulled around in this world, delusionary world. When the meditator sees this as it is really happening, his mind withdraws from engaging in the sense object. Because he's seen the way that the mind lands on things and gets attached and gets drawn into things, he gets nibbita, disillusionment, or disenchantment. I like disenchantment, that word, because enchanting is when a spell is cast on you, right? You're enchanted by some magician, or you're enchanted by someone's beauty. So you get disenchantment because you see the mind continually drawn into this, into this, into this, into this, into this, thing after thing after thing. It dawns on you in the end that, well, what if my mind just doesn't be pulled into anything? He said, this is viraka, the end, this is dispassion. Because of dispassion, the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion extinguish. Because these are extinguished, you gain liberation, vimutti. When you know liberation, when liberation occurs, you know liberation. Vimutti jnana dasana, to see and know liberation of the heart. So what this means for a meditator is you sit and you meditate, you say, watch the breath, in-breath and the out-breath, and the mind wanders off. Because the mind has wandered off for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour. How long did it get caught in your stories before you, oh, that's right, you remember yourself. We don't like to remember ourselves, remember, we like to be like the zebra. We like to be invisible in our ideas, in our conceptual world. You remember yourself, shake it down, you come back. I'm going to watch the breathing. If you get good at meditating, you might absorb into the breathing. But what you have done is just replaced one set of objects with another object. So eventually you shake off the breathing too. You simply know yourself with mindfulness that's not going out to any object. The mind unifies, purifies, centers, gathers together, becomes bright, becomes clearer, becomes more powerful. You will feel yourself sitting there. You're usually, if people are experiencing this, you'll notice their heads come up and they have a kind of movement like this, centering their attention. I see this quite often with meditators. This means you're on the right path. As the attention centers, you get a piti, a rapture will come through the body, will energize and spark you awake. You are not sleeping, you are not dreaming, you're not caught in a funk, you are not caught in the breath, You are very, very awake and present. Happiness arises. The happiness is sukha. The Buddha said this sukha you can indulge. This is not happiness that comes from sense pleasures. This is happiness that comes from when the mind is withdrawn into itself and become bright. It becomes liberated, vimutti. You can experience these things. Don't count yourself out. I see many meditators, or speak to many meditators, who are experiencing these things, but very often the meditation teacher doesn't. Meditation teachers get very attached to methods. So they continue, or come back and watch the breath, or come back and watch the feet, or note everything that arises. Happy, happy, or bliss, bliss, or concentrated, concentrated, or bright, bright, and then you come back to your meditation object. They keep advising people to go back into the course when the mind is actually already coming together. So I meet a lot of people who do have these experiences, which is why I want to mention them and talk about them. So this was the fire sermon. That you have the eye, you have forms, you have eye consciousness. When the three meet, you have contacting this object. The eye is burning, forms are burning. Eye consciousness is burning, burning with the fires of greed, of hatred and delusion. Seeing this, one becomes tired of this process of the mind moving from object to object, and it will center, unify, withdraw, and liberate. The fire sermon. Did anybody look up the fire sermon of T.S. Eliot? It had nothing to do with Buddhist thing. I think I wrote somewhere in the description. T.S. Eliot wrote this long, very boring poem. And in it was, the third part was called the fire sermon. He really liked Buddhism, and he stated in his memoirs that the fire sermon was the most important of Buddhist teachings, like the Sermon on the Mount is for Christianity. So I was quite excited by this. I thought, oh, he must be onto something, this T.S. Eliot guy. And then I looked it up this morning. It had nothing to do with meditation. It was very disappointing. So if you saw that I mentioned the fire sermon of T.S. Eliot, you can ignore it. Anyone have any questions, comments? Yeah, start with the easy questions.
Yeah, start with the easy questions. That was my puffball. Wait to the next question.
Yeah, I don't know. There is a lot of speculation on what an arahant, a fully enlightened person, can do. Partly, if you look around, there are various enlightened or supposedly enlightened people. Usually we call non-duality. So if you look up non-duality teachers, there's quite a lot of them about. I was looking at one, Angelo Di Lullo, if anyone knows him. I think he's Canadian, but sometimes you see in their behavior that it isn't as perfect as you were talking about. So one was, what's his name, Mooji. Some of you have seen Mooji, heard Mooji? Yeah. So he's supposedly enlightened. Of course, you can't tell. You can't give him a little Facebook 10 questions, see whether you're enlightened or not. But there are some things about inappropriate sexual behavior. He seems to have a whole bunch of girlfriends and things going on. Can you be enlightened and still be doing that? It seems to be that enlightenment, there's a set of stages that one goes through of initial awakening or satori, and then seems to be a series that goes through. In terms of Buddhism, the Mahakassapa was the Buddha's foremost disciple for renunciation practices. And he was asked, why do you practice renunciation when you're already liberated? Surely you can dispense with all that celibacy and 1 meal a day stuff because you are now enlightened. And he said, I will continue to practice the ascetic practices for the benefit of the lay people who see us, for the benefit of the young monks who come in and practice, and because it's a comfortable and convenient way to live at ease for himself as a monk. So he listed, I think, about 10 reasons, but these were the core reasons. So one can assume that there is a thing in enlightenment traditions. There are people that get enlightened because they practice for many, many lifetimes, and it's their right. We call the Samma Sambuddha. There are people that get enlightened by accident. It's called a Pacceka Buddha, accidental Buddha. They stumble upon it. And then there are people who get enlightened through practicing. It's called an Anubuddha. So I do think maybe some of these people with the supposedly enlightened but seem to live in a questionable way seem to be more of a Pacceka Buddha, someone who stumbled upon it, rather than someone who's come to it through a dedicated systematic practice. If you have done a dedicated systematic practice, you will be in control of those things. But who knows? Yeah. This Angelo Di Lulo said he went to listen in university to a teacher who came and was talking about Buddhism. And the teacher said that you withdraw from samsara, which is another word for this delusionary world we live in. And he thought to himself, I have to do that. And then, boom, that's when, not enlightenment, he got a satori, or an awakening experience that then cascaded, and a few years later was supposedly fully liberated. So, interesting. He also came to it through the realization of withdrawing from this samsara world. Yeah. Anybody else? I have a lot of these things in my head, and then some days it comes out well, and some days it comes out a bit mixed up. So I understand I can say things that are a little confusing sometimes.
Yeah, I know you often talk about enlightenment being the goal of our practice, but that comes from certain tradition, mostly coming from India through Southeast Asia. But in Chinese philosophy, which had a big impact, of course, on Zen, they advise not having a
Yeah, there's very much so. The Indian approach to the Chinese approach. Chinese have this whole system approach. Indians are very kind of like, this one thing is true, forget everything else. And that's kind of how the two systems work. There's some interesting experiments done on this. This is in Dr. Holly. Her favorite book was the, I'll think of it in a minute. And they had pictures of fish tanks. And in this fish tank there'd be a big fish, some little fish, some bubbles, maybe some starfish, maybe a little motor going, and in this picture. And they showed the picture to Americans and they showed it to Chinese. And you look at the picture for a minute or so, and then they take the picture away and they say, can you draw what you've just seen? And the Americans would draw the biggest fish that was in the tank, that was the central feature of this fish tank. And they draw it in detail, usually bigger than it actually was in the original. But they will miss the bubbles and the starfish and all the other little things that were in the tank, because they focus on that one thing. The Chinese, on the other hand, would take that biggest central feature and make it smaller, but they would include all the other things in the tank. So that shows like a very different way of thinking, right? Different approach. A systems thinking as opposed to a linear thinking. So Chinese idea thinks in cycles. What goes up is going to come down. If you get a hubris, you get a nemesis. Whereas the kind of Western thinking thinks in straight lines, right? If it's got warmer for the last 4 years, then it's going to get increasingly warmer, and in 10 years we're all going to boil to death. And not that it will come in a cycle. The interesting thing with this experiment, architecture, the Geography of Thought is the name of the book. Nisbet, somebody Nisbet or Nisbet. He sounds like a Muppet, right? Nisbet. The interesting thing was they took this experiment to Singapore, where they have a Chinese culture but very westernized. Do you think the Chinese followed the American way or the Chinese way of reproducing the fish tank? In Singapore.
I would guess that they followed the American style.
It depended what language you asked them the question in. Very interesting. If you say reproduce what you just saw in the fish tank in Chinese, they reproduce the whole thing. And if you ask them in English, they just produce the big fish. Really interesting, just because the assumption was Americans only notice the big fish. And this experiment seems to suggest that no, actually all of the information goes in, but you retrieve only certain information. So, yeah, there's a difference in the approach. Just in further answer to the question, though, the central sutta of Mahayana Buddhism was the Lotus Sutra. And in the Lotus Sutra, it states absolutely explicitly over and over and over again, there is this goal that you have to reach. It had the simile of the burning house, that the house is on fire, but the children are playing in the house. How do you get the children out the house? Well, you promise some of them there's a very nice goat chariot out here, and then some of them come out because they want the goat chariot, but the others aren't interested. So you give them a different goal. You say, well, there's what's the next thing up? A donkey chariot. And so some more of them come out, but still some of them stay in the burning house. So then you say, well, there's an elephant chariot out here. I forget the animals. And so the sutta was saying that there is no Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. It is only stories that are told to get you out of the burning house. That's explicit. That's what the central theme and story of the Lotus Sutra was. So, yeah, they were very, very much, that central sutta of Mahayana is very much saying there is this liberation. It's not about living a bit more mindfully in the world. There is this completely other thing. You have to step out of your burning house. So notice the same, similarly as the fire sermon. Yeah.
One point I want to make is that, you can probably hear me anyway, the one point I want to make is that would fit in, the thing about language, which language, they asked the question, and that would fit in with what Noam Chomsky, who started out as a linguist,
Right.
wrote about how
Deep structure.
different languages have different senses of reality.
Right.
That if you speak in Chinese and only know Chinese, your reality is formed by that language. If you only know
Right.
English, you have a different reality because your reality is formed
Right.
by English. So asking the question in different languages is asking for two different realities.
Yeah, he talks about deep structure, which I found interesting. That he said that an idea occurs as a complete whole, and then you encode it into language to say it. So I can say, the dog bit me on the leg, or I can say, I was bitten on the leg by the dog. He said originally you have this deep structure that occurs first, but you can feel this in meditation. It's interesting, because you feel an idea bubble up, and then you know what that whole idea is, complete. And then if you're mindful, you can feel it get lineated into words, and then you start to tell a story using words. I read a couple of days ago about a number of women, mostly, I think they were all women, who don't have an internal dialogue, who don't speak to themselves. And they were asked how they think, and they just say, well, thoughts occur if they need to occur. It's quite strange. I presume you all have an internal dialogue, right? Have you ever examined that? I see this all the time, because I say to myself, right, I think it's about time for a cup of tea, because I'm English. But when I've started to say, right, it's about time for a cup of tea, I'd already got up to go and make the tea. I'm commenting to myself on what I've already decided and started to do. And the commentary comes along after the fact. And it feels like this commentator is making the decisions, but he's not. He's just doing this running commentary on what you are already doing. So if you practice really well, you can turn off the commentator, which is really interesting experience. And you find yourself just doing things, automated. The first time I experienced this, I was very new to meditation. I'd done a couple of weekends in the monastery, and I was driving back from work. I was on the split shift, so I have 4 hours off in the afternoon. I was driving back. It was about a 20-minute drive. And as I was driving, I just snapped into a timeless moment. And the commentator turned off. And I just saw my hands moving, steering, indicating, and my foot moving on the pedal. Feel my head checking in the wing mirror. And I was just seeing my body driving the car. It's like, I'm not even doing that. Very strange. Anybody had something like this experience? I do meet people from time to time. So, when I had entered into the monastery, I found I had the duty of making breakfast for everybody, which was the hardest morning chore in the monastery. I guess you've been in the monastery, Mike. You know, we all have morning chores, right? So some people feed the cat. Everybody wants to do that one. Some people empty the bins. No one wants to do that one. But making breakfast is the hardest one. You've got the tea and the porridge and everything else, and special dietary requirements, of course. And then I would say to myself, go make breakfast, And then my body would walk into the kitchen and my hands would move and grab things and turn things on. And like, I was just a observer to that. So yeah, I think Chomsky was right when he talked about this deep structure. Ideas occur in totality, but then you put them into words and you lineate them. Yeah. Though I'm not an expert on Noam Chomsky. And he seemed to go off the rails a few times.
I remember one of my early experiences, I think, after I started meditating with the voice. And it became this obsessive, there was a phrase that became quite obsessive, and it was very difficult for me to handle for a while. It was quite humorous, but difficult to handle. And the phrase is, it was then that he realized.
Okay.
And that became quite difficult for quite a while because I found it very frustrating. It would come up, unbidden, and it would lead me nowhere.
You got no self, you got no agency then.
Yeah, no agency at all. But then I became very comfortable with it because,
Right.
there was no point.
Because somehow it all unfolds.
Yeah.
No one I know is in my head, but I know and it's all right. How does it go? No one I know is in my head, but I know. Anyone help me out? No Beatles. You're a Beatles fanatic, right?
I don't know art, but I know what I like.
What was the Strawberry Fields, right? No one I know is in my head, but I know, and it's a dream.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow it works out.
Somehow it all turns out.
Somehow it, yeah.
I think I disagree. Or something.
Yeah. But I think that's what Lenin was experiencing. He experienced like, I don't know this controller in my head, but somehow everything happens without me having to have that little voice in control of it. I don't know. Okay. I think we're about done for the day. Got a little distracted and off on different topics this evening. But anyway, I hope that you can look up the fire sermon. It's a very short and simple teaching. It was very tricky for me to understand because you had eye, you had forms, eye consciousness and contacting, ear, and you had sounds and ear consciousness and contacting. So you had this matrix of stuff that I tried to make into a conceptual framework. And I didn't realize it was referring to how you just notice one thing at a time. That's when I realized that, then I knew how to practice with the way that the Buddha had actually taught. So notice this process of the mind attaching to one object at a time. Getting drawn in, getting pulled around. Find out what the opposite is. Unify the mind, center it so it's not going out to anything. You enter into jhana experiences. At least for first four, they're called four jhana experiences. These are the purification of the mind. This then is in stark contrast because you see from that purification very clearly how the mind gets pulled into things and yanked around by sensory contact. And you see the opposite. You see the pristine brightness, clarity, power, strength that comes from when the mind becomes unified. So this is all the joys of meditating, learning meditation. Okay, so we are good for today. Can I do the blessing, finish off? Sabitiyo vivajantu sabbharogo vinasatu mate bhavatvantarayo sukhiti kayuko abhava abhivadana sili sanichang vutta pachayino chattaro dhamma Vadanti ayu vano sukhang balang. Next week is the Anatalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha's second teaching, which was the teaching on no self.